Welcome to Convo Fango. Today, we are joined by one of my ultimate fucking nightmare makers, Bryan Bertino, writer and director of The Strangers.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for coming to hang out with us. I'm a little bit upset with you because I just rewatched The Strangers, so I have animosity towards you specifically right now.
Well, good. I guess I'm glad. Like, I always say with like if I made comedies, I would want people to laugh. So I
Mhm.
think it's good when people are bothered by
Super bothered.
movies I've done.
Well done, sir. No, really though, I did watch this in the theaters when it came out. I went with my sister. Maybe we were a little bit too young to watch it. Scared the shit out of both of us. And I honestly think that I have not rewatched it in its entirety since. And I mean that as a
Oh, wow.
compliment. And it's because it's not that it wasn't a good movie, it's that it was maybe too good and it was too scary and it really disturbed me. And it just really got to the core of what disturbs me and what scares me. So I've never
Mhm.
rewatched it. And I was going to rewatch it last night to prepare for today, but then I was too scared because it was dark. And I was like, no, because if I hear a noise or something, I'm going to freak out. So I had to wait till the break of day to rewatch this to prepare to talk to you
Oh,
today.
wow.
And I still got scared. I heard like a knock on the wall and I was like, what the fuck is that?
That's funny. No, look, I like the idea of making movies that are scary, like
Mhm.
that are actually, I enjoy all the different kinds of horror, I really do, but like what I like the most are, goes back to movies that fucked with me as a kid and and really bothered me. And so I think, with strangers, it's so exciting to me to think that even all these years later that people can actually say that that movie scares them, like bothers them. Like it's a cool feeling.
It's a
It,
cool feeling to fuck people up. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. What are some movies that fucked you up as a kid? What led us to this?
I think The Exorcist
Mhm.
bothered me quite a bit. I think I saw movies maybe like you guys. Like I was able to kind of rent whatever I wanted and see whatever I wanted as a kid. And so sometimes you stumbled into things that were above your pay grade a little bit. And so something like The Exorcist like really bothered me as like I went to church, and so those kinds of like biblical things, it was really terrifying to me. And because I was like, that's hell and I'm going to go to hell, and maybe I'm going to go to hell because I'm watching this
Oh,
movie.
no.
And as a child of the 80s where like devil worshippers was a real thing that like you were like afraid of, then like stuff like that. Or I remember Jacob's Ladder being a movie that like I parents were like, you can't watch that movie. It is devil worship. It is an evil movie. And so like seeing that the first time, I think was something that stayed with me all these years. And then, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, is still to me like probably one of the scariest movies I've ever
Absolutely.
seen.
Yes. And also that thing of like when a parent, it's one thing for your parents to be like, you're not allowed to watch this stuff. Okay, fine. But when they single something out as like, you are absolutely under no circumstances ever allowed to watch this one movie, I'm like, well, there's no better way to like pique a kid's curiosity than to like
Oh yeah.
completely forbid this one title. That I'm like, well, what the fuck is in it? Like,
Yeah. I think that I don't understand it, like, but I guess that's, I don't have kids, but I guess that's the way parents work, is that you think every generation thinks that they forget what happened when they were kids and they forget what temptation was. And so they're just like, if I just tell them not to do it, they won't do it.
yeah, that's gonna be the first thing on the watch list now.
And it's literally the first thing.
But
It was
listen,
much
mom, I would sell a
harder when
piece of
I
my
was a kid.
soul. Oh yeah.
Yeah. It was harder when I was a kid. We had to like figure it out. Like now, I can't even imagine. Kids can just literally type into their phone, and now they're watching just anything. Like,
Yes.
For us, it was like, no, 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 you had to get like a bootleg copy or like go to the gas station video store and maybe you could find Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something, but now you can watch it anywhere you want.
Yeah, you had to put the work in. You had to do like the underground trades and like do like some seedy back alley business to get the thing, you
Yeah.
know? It's like
Yeah.
to get the holy grail. Now you just type it in. I'm like, well, that's not quite as satisfying, but okay.
But you also lose a little bit of the myth of movies in that way. I think,
Absolutely.
it was like Faces of Death was oh wow, like, what is this gonna be? Or, some of those kinds of movies where, yeah, it built up and it built up and or all you had was the cover box to kind of be
Mhm.
terrified of and like build the courage, to. And so often you're disappointed, but every so often you would end up with something that really stuck with you.
What's the most terrifying? Like, what was your most terrifying VHS cover that you remember as a kid?
Oh wow! Oh man, it's so hard now. I don't even know if I can think about it that way without separating what I thought of the movie. It's like Halloween is a cover box that I will always remember.
Yeah.
But that was a movie that like I saw when I was like 9 or something. But you also think about like Pet Cemetery being like that cover box for Pet Cemetery,
Mhm.
like was so creepy, like to me, even though the movie itself, I don't know, there were some little sections of it, but like, but I would also make the argument that like the TV movie was like the scariest thing that
Mhm.
I saw, and that was on television.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like Pennywise screwed me up my whole childhood, and like can't believe that I was scared by that.
I think there's a whole generation of us where it was like it just hit in that sweet spot. And I think
Mhm.
parents were like, oh, it's on TV. How bad could it be? And then there's this whole generation of children that were allowed to watch it because it was on TV and it just like fucked us up forever.
Yeah, like Tim Curry saying like it floats, like
Oh, no.
like it still bugs me.
Yeah. Hiya, Georgie. Yeah, no, it's like
Mm.
forever just in there. Man. So we're talking about The Strangers 14 years later, and I'm thinking when you wrote this, there's no possible way that you could have known how like deeply it would resonate. And we're still talking about this 14 years later. Did you see, what is it, Shudder's like 101 scariest horror movie moments of all time? Have you been watching
I
that?
I haven't been watching it, but I heard that Strangers, I think, maybe made it, like, so that's cool.
Maybe made it,
Like,
definitely made it. I will tell you, confirmed. It is definitely on the list. And it's just, it's the same thing that resonates with all of us. It's like the scene where Liv Tyler is getting a glass of water, and then the baghead guy, you see him pop
mhm.
into frame, and he's not doing anything. He's just standing there. But we know he's there. She doesn't know he's there. So we're just like, as the audience, we're just waiting, and we know it's coming. We don't know when it's coming. And she's just still drinking her water, and that's just so chilling and disturbing. And then probably the scariest moment is that awful line of, why are you doing this to us? And it's just because you were home. Because we all want to think like, okay, if we follow the rules, if we don't put ourselves into like a stupid situation, like these are things that are like avoidable. Maybe I won't get stalked by Michael Myers. Maybe I won't get like stabbed to death in the woods by Jason Voorhees. But this is like, you're just at home and you have the doors
Mhm.
locked. And this is supposed to be like, you like to think that you can protect yourself, you can protect your family. So like, you come in and you just like shatter all of this, and there's not a motive for it other than just you were home. And that's like something that has like stuck and just has like fucked people up for 14 years.
Yeah. No, I mean, look, I that was Strangers was the first scary script, horror script that I had ever written, and so I think for me, I was just trying to come up with what I found scary and what actually would resonate with me, and at the time I was just trying to think of something that I could make. And if I was like, can I get 50 grand or something and make a small film? So I was like, okay, I know these many actors, so it's like, so that's how many characters can be in it. And then you start kind of honing in on an idea of the story, And you hit the nail on the head where it's like so often horror movies are about happy endings, or they end up with happy endings, whether that's because of studios or or financial reasons, or what people, and sometimes the story is that's where it goes. But for me, I was like, when I hear that bump in the middle of the night and I get scared, or like I think someone's come inside, like I don't think to myself, God, I can't wait to win in an hour. Like I can't wait to like defeat the evil. I'm scared that I'm going to get attacked, or someone I love is going to be attacked. And so it felt like a natural progression to tell a story where instead of Jamie Lee like fighting back or something like that, you would end up, no, the worst nightmare, the worst scenario. Like you're standing in a living room and there's someone in the house, and then at the end of the movie, they actually do stab you. And that it's like, and
Right.
how interesting would that be? And at the time it wasn't, you know, this was before a lot of found footage stuff where it was like you did get unhappy endings more common, and it was very difficult for a lot of people in Hollywood to even wrap their head around. Like, we're gonna make a horror movie in which, no, like Naomi Watts is not gonna figure it out, and it's like, no, they're gonna get stabbed, and that's the end. And so it took a lot of fighting many battles for Strangers to eventually get released, even like, because people were just so afraid of doing something like having people stabbed to death.
Yeah. So you did something really interesting with that though. Like I was remembering watching it in the theaters and I remember being just so disturbed by the stabbing and I think I actually like looked away and I kind of felt like that moment of like I don't know if I can finish this movie. It's like already the end of the movie, but I felt like I don't know if I can keep watching this. And then I rewatched it and I think I was imagining it much more violent than it actually is. You don't show a ton of violence. You show they're stabbed, so we know that that's happening, but then we cut to like outside and we're just hearing it. But it's like in
Mm-hmm.
my mind, I had built it up to get it's just horrific because I'm imagining what's happening and I know what's happening and I know they're being stabbed. But like it was just interesting rewatching it all these years later and thinking back to how I felt about that scene and how I remembered that scene. And it's like you didn't rely on just like the violence, you like let it be implied violence, which somehow made it worse, I guess.
I mean, I've always, I look, I think it's fascinating, especially with how violent movies, how much more violence you see. Like, I mean, the most recent Scream movie has way more violence, like it in it than Strangers did. But I've always felt like it's a testament to Scott and Liv's performances and our emotional connection to those
Mhm.
characters that make it so much worse. I think there's three stabs. I think maybe four stabs in Strangers that you see, but I, for whatever reason, I think it feels real in a way that a lot of movie violence doesn't, and so you end up seeing a lot less. And I think, yeah, people are often surprised, or I'll hear people talk to me about, oh, the stabbing sequence was just so difficult, and I'm like, it's like you really don't see that much. I mean, I remember during the sound mixing, like people having difficulty listening to it, like just over and over, because it didn't feel, it felt real.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, I do think that that's the big thing about it, is that even though it doesn't show a lot, and I think part of that was like we ended up having to cut a stab or two just to get the R rating, like at the time. But yeah, a little bit went a long way for people.
Yeah, it worked in your favor, maybe cutting out a couple of extra stabs because it that like it really was strange watching it now and thinking like, oh God, I thought it was like so much more violent
Hmm.
than that. But it's not that it was more violent. It's just it's the way that it struck me and it has just stuck with me. And it was still hard to watch now, like how she's like, just look at me, because I'm like, I imagine it's too real. I imagine in that situation, like at that point, what else can you do? So I imagine that would
Hmm.
kind of be my reaction. It's like, okay, don't look at it, just look at me. Like, we'll just pretend it's not happening. Like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah,
You
yeah. I mean,
know? Like,
and I think there is something about being tied down and just
mhm.
feeling, helpless. I mean, I think we always had kind of this huge goal. And when we were making the movie, my cinematographer, Peter Sova, who has since passed away, but he and I would talk a lot about how do we get how do we get the audience to feel like they're in the house? And so everything that we did in terms of, there's no crane shots, there's no, everything's basically at the character's level, was with this goal of putting to kind of draw the audience in and make them feel like they were in the space. And I think that the byproduct of that is that the scares sometimes hit harder, or a moment like
Mhm.
Liv standing, it's like you feel like you've been in a living room kind of like that, or and then by the end, you feel like you've taken this journey, whether you agree with everything that the characters did or if you thought they made mistakes. It was like you you feel like it's relatable on some level, and that you could imagine yourself in that situation some.
Yeah. And we do kind of like a Jamie Lee moment with Liv in the closet towards the end there.
Yeah.
She's like-
Yeah.
Also, I think you did just I like actually paused it to look at the timestamp because you did such a great job of making us give a shit about these characters in only the span of like
Hmm.
15 minutes. Like 15 minutes is spent, we're kind of getting to know them. They're already in like it's like a tense, uncomfortable situation, but they're both very likable. And I think because I think our character shows most when we're like in a tense situation or an argument or a fight. That's when you see someone's like
Hmm.
true colors. So the way that they each treat each other within that tense situation, I end up really liking both of them and I'm rooting for them. So 15 minutes of that, and then I see them thrown into this other tumultuous situation, but I'm already like deeply invested in them emotionally because I very much like them as people. And you did that in such a short span of like condensed time and showed me so much of who they are. So then watching them go through this, I'm like, oh, it's like it hits even harder because I actually really like both of them.
Hmm. No, I mean the idea that, like, by starting with something where you got kind of broken people a little bit, and that the horror would clarify things for them over the course of the movie, is something that I don't even really remember why I just picked that. I know that I became fascinated with the idea of a couple that had that you they that instead of it starting with they're off, they're getting married, or they're on their way to a party and they're excited. I've seen that in so many different movies and so many slashers or wherever, where you're kind of starting from happiness and then bad things happen. And so I think the more that I thought about it, and as I started to like work on the script, yeah, focusing in on that idea of like these two broken people, we don't know exactly why, but it it created something that I think I strive for as I right now, which is like to make the audience kind of lean in
Mhm.
with the dramatic storyline of anything that you're doing. Like whether, it's like you look at something like the Babadook, and it's like you care about this mother and her child, like, and so then you start this journey. Or some of the more modern horror, I think, is built around this idea of actually finding a way into your characters, and they're not just placeholders for scares. And so, yeah, I'm glad that that I came up with that idea, and but I don't think even at the time when I first jotted it down in my notes that I understood the importance that it would have in the story, and really until I think, because we shot the film mostly 95% in order, and so we shot the stabbing stuff last, and by the end of it, you really like, there were people on set that like teared up, like during, which is the only time that that's really ever happened to me, is like people actually, like, it was almost like a stage play where people like in the crew were like emotional because we had done this 30 odd days that summed up this journey from, from them walking in the house to being stabbed. And I think that we all became invested in their characters, and so then I think it got exciting, and it's something that I'm really glad that people resonate, it resonates with people today even.
I think it's so cool to hear that you shooting it in order, let it play out like a stage play. So it kind of witnessing that live, it kind of played out the same way and resonated as well. Like that doesn't happen often, you know?
No, I mean, it was, and it was all built up. So, I mean, that last day that we shot was 20 hours or something. It was the longest day. And so you're on this stage where you go in and it's dark, and then it was bright by the time you leave because it's the next morning. And, but like inside that house, we had all these lights blasting. So it felt like daytime. And yeah, I mean, like they were tied to the chair for hours just going through it, and yeah, it became this experience. We had always talked about it as like the stabbing sequence wasn't a horror movie. It was a dramatic moment where something horrific is happening, and I think that that's also kind of going back to your last question. I think why it plays differently than just seeing like Jason swing an axe is that it really did feel like two people were just being stabbed.
Yeah. And it's just like, I'm like thinking about it again and picturing it in my mind right now. And I'm just like, oh, like it gives me like a little shudder to think about it. God, where did you guys shoot this? Where is that house?
South, um, in South Carolina, in Florence, South Carolina, which was a very small town. I think I drove through it like 3 years ago, and it has gotten a little bigger now. But back then we didn't have much. There was like a couple of gas stations, Sonics and stuff like that. And like I think I stayed in town for Thanksgiving, and there was McDonald's was the only game in town that year. I mean, and so yeah, we there was a house, and then we basically recreated it. But the house, in a lot of ways, I I grew up in a ranch style home that was pretty much the exact. I just kind of laid it out
Mm.
exactly like that house because that was, I had certainly never worked on a movie where you got to build a set. And so, like, I think it was easier for me to even wrap my head around, like, you know, I build something I know because I also think that this was a time when a lot of horror films, there was a lot of wish fulfillment, and like every house was this beautiful like two-story craftsman house because like, or LA houses, and I was like, I didn't know any kind of house was
Yeah,
like that. Like
yeah.
nobody I knew lived in those houses.
Right.
We lived in these kinds of houses. And so, to me, it was kind of like how, again, going back to like putting people in the space, I was like, there's a lot of people in the middle of the country that don't know those super beautiful houses. And
Right.
so, like I wanted it to feel very real, and I wanted it to be very warm and inviting, and because it just felt like that was all much more logical to me than some of these like big mansions or blue light, like all the like blue tinted horror films where I'm just like, that doesn't, I understand the idea behind it, but for me it was always like, no, 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 make a horror movie inviting, and because people don't come home and turn on like a fluorescent lamp next to their bed. Like,
I mean, that's what I do. I like to take pictures under them, actually.
yeah, yeah.
Just garish overhead fluorescent lighting. But that's another thing too, is it because there's a little bit of an added layer of safety when it's something like that, when it's like, oh, that doesn't look like my home, or that doesn't look like what my day-to-day life looks like. The more you place it into like an audience's like normal kind of setting, the scarier it is, because it's like, oh, that actually does look similar to where I live, or where houses that I know, or like my friends' houses. So that's another layer. You remove another layer of fantasy and you get closer to the reality, which makes it scarier.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that like you end up a lot of people that make movies come from New York or LA or and or they move to New York and LA and then they don't really want to tell stories, or it's much harder to tell a story about some small town in Kansas or whatever. It's like and so I think that there's something nice about trying on some level to, just like Martin Scorsese makes movies that are often, some of his best movies are about New York. And it's like he knows that world, he knows the streets, he knows all the ins and outs. Like I'm not at all comparing myself to him, but it's like I think that, of the world like The Strangers or even some of the other movies I've done, that's the area that I know back in like the back of my hand. I know those worlds. And I feel like whether or not you're from, a street like The Strangers or you've even been on it, I think that there's something that like resonates with audiences about like feeling an authenticity and like a connection to it.
Mhm.
And it doesn't feel fake. And so I think that all those little things can help draw an audience in, which I think is all about making movies scarier.
Absolutely. Do you ever see people like make pilgrimages to the stranger's house? Like now that social media is such a big thing, like do you see people go there and take pictures outside?
I went when I drove through. I found the house through the internet because I couldn't remember exactly how to get there because it was just and the same woman owned the house uh that did, and she definitely said that there had been a number of people that have made the trip. So I feel for them because I don't think they like, it even, I think we would have all apologized more in advance. But I mean, you also never think that anybody's gonna give a shit. Like,
Right.
I mean, I'm blown away that, you know, I'm in Austin right now. I went to college here. The 19-year-old me would be shocked that anybody would want to watch anything that I've done 20 years later, 15 years later, 14 years later.
They want to watch all the things that you've done. So that's pretty cool.
No, it's very, it's exciting.
And for that woman, I feel like people who own like famous horror movie locations, I'm like, well, you kind of just gotta like, well, just gotta have fun with it. But for this woman in particular, I do feel bad because I really, really hope that people do not dress as the strangers and stand in front of her house to take a picture.
Yeah,
She's just trying to do the dishes, just a normal ass woman, like going about her day, and then there's like the bag head guy standing outside her window. Like that's terrifying.
yeah, someone knocking on their door. I don't
Yeah.
know, like,
Oh, I want to ask you why the line is Tamara here? Like, did you know a Tamara? Did you throw that in there as like an Easter egg for
a
a
friend of
friend?
mine knew a friend of mine knew someone with that name, and that was really it was, I remember him telling a story, him and his wife, about a girl that they were friends with, and that name stuck, and then I just put it into the script, and
All
then
right.
and that really was it. It was like, I don't think I've ever met her, or maybe I have, and it was a long time ago, but like, yeah, it just, the name stuck in my head, and I it and I just never thought to change it.
Well, it's good because it's a fairly unique name. It's not like if the line was is Brian here or something. Like it's like is
Yeah,
Tamara
yeah,
here? People are like, that's I know what that's from.
yeah.
So well done on that. That's cool. And then also you based this on some real life events. Was it local things, like local home invasions or something that were happening?
Yeah, I mean, there were two different kind of stories. That one, I read Helter Skelter when I was a kid,
How young were you? I'm
and
wondering, you're probably too young to read that. I'm wondering how
I
young.
was like 10 or
Oh God.
11
Okay.
somewhere. Like
Gee.
I maybe 12. I went to stay of my summer the summer with my grandmother, who lived in an even smaller town than I grew up in a town called Mingus, Texas. It was like population of 200 or something. And I went out there to spend a few weeks, and my I asked my dad for some books, and we were standing in the garage, and he just went through some books, and that was one of the books and that he gave me. Looking back, I have no real idea why he would have thought that that was an appropriate book, and it was a and my grandmother was like, at that age where like she would get up in the middle of the night because she didn't sleep that much, and so it was a very creaky house, and you were just. But something specifically stuck with me where Sadie, I think when the family had gone into the Tate house, and they I think there was a story about them wandering around and and kind of sizing up the different people that were in the house, because
Mhm.
this was the 60s and people just came and walked in and out of, like, hippies walked in and out of houses. People didn't even think about that kind of stuff. And so Sadie went into one room, and there was a woman reading on the bed, I think Abigail Folger, and she was just like, hi. And then she left, and then they like talked, and they said a woman's over here and two people over there, and then she came back, and she was like, can you come in here? And this woman had no reason to not think that she wasn't just a normal person. And so that kind of notion that stuck with me for 15 years, the idea that like you can't spot evil, the idea that like people that are about to do evil things still like order food at the gas station and might still say thank you, or like all the different polite kind of parts of just human existence still might be a part of us, but we tend to think of monsters in this very extreme way, or that they're putting on a complete act, when it's like it might be somewhere in between. And so that was, a big part. And then as a kid, I grew up in a house very much like the stranger's house, where there was like huge pieces of land on both sides. Like I think each house had a couple of acres. And one night somebody came and like knocked on the door. My parents were gone, they were out that night, and my little sister answered it, and then and I came up, and she was probably 7 or 8, and I was 10. This was latchkey kid time. So like and she said that, oh, they had asked for somebody that didn't live there. And I think we were told back then, you say like, oh, my dad's in the back or whatever. And so they left. And then the next day we found out that people had been like driving up and down the house, and they would bang on doors. And if someone didn't answer the door, they kicked in the door and then were ransacking
God.
the house. And so the only reason that we didn't get robbed was because we answered the door. And so I flipped it on the other side. What if somebody was driving down the street and just said, we're going to kill the first person that answers the door?
Mhm.
And so
That's
then that's how it came together.
that's terrifying. Also, I probably would have been home as a kid and not answered the door. And then what happens? They kick open the door and I'm like, "Hi, I'm actually home." What the fuck?
Yeah.
I'm home, but I'm also 10, so I don't know how I'm gonna stop you, but like that's terrifying.
Yeah, there
God.
is no lesson to learn from this. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know if we should have answered the door or
I
not,
mean, in your
but
case, you should have, but like my brain is like, what's the right thing to do? How would I have
yeah.
survived this? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, which
Yeah.
is what I hate because I'm like, no, I need to know the rules clearly defined so I know what to do and what not to do, which is again why
Yeah.
The Strangers is so fucking scary because I'm like, you're following the rules. You're just at home. Like you're doing all the things you're supposed to do.
No, I mean, look, and I think there was a lot that I thought about because I'd seen so many slasher movies, and that notion of like, let's get into a room and just hold a gun at the door. Like that was always
Mhm.
the idea that I had with Jason or whatever, is like if you just sat with your back to back, regardless of the fact that nobody actually wants to watch that movie, but everybody wants that to happen. But
Right.
like I want to see the little indie where it's just like two people back to back for 83 minutes and then the movie just ends, just so that the director can stand up and just be like, right? This is what you've always wanted. Like, come
Is
on.
that your next project? Do we get to break
Yeah.
that as a Fangoria exclusive? Like that's your next
Yeah.
project coming up?
I would love to take like complaints people have in horror films and just make that movie and just be like, okay, all right.
And the name of the movie would
Congratulations.
be like, You Asked for It. And then that's
Yeah,
what the movie is. I would watch that.
just we can do like 12 of them on Fangoria. It'll be like somebody walks in, there's a haunted house, they hear a sound and they leave, and then you just sit in the living room of that house for 74 more minutes. And you're just like,
Amazing.
that's it. That's it. Just the sun just slowly sets in the background, and then the
And
movie's
then,
over. And it's just like, cool.
and then each
Like,
installment, it just goes to black and it's just like, poof, you asked for it. And that's it.
yeah,
Like
you asked for
every
it.
time.
This is wish fulfilled. You finally get what
There
you
you
wanted.
go. I think we're onto
It's
something with this. I'm just saying.
like, oh, I'll use my cell phone. I will have perfect reception, and the cops will come and take me away at minute 19, and then 80 minutes of just sitting in the woods.
It's
And
just like a nature cam then at that point
mhm.
for 80 more minutes.
People will be like, I love minute 22 because a deer kind of went in the background, but then nothing happened.
I saw a glowing eye around like minute 26 and I was like, oh, something's about to happen, but then it
It
also
was
didn't. But
it was just a raccoon, and then it left, and that was it.
and then that was the end. That's it. All right. All right. Well, you have The Strangers screening on October 22nd for Panic at the Paramount in Austin, Texas, and you're going to be there live in the flesh doing a Q&A.
Yeah, yeah, it's exciting. I mean, like I said, I went to college here, so I went to movies at the Paramount. So I think it's kind of exciting, to get a chance to do it. I hope people come because it'll feel very weird if you're doing a Q&A and you're just by yourself, like. And so, but be careful what you ask for, because it's like public speaking is like, that's my true fear. It's like, so I think that like that would
Just
be like the scariest thing for me, is if like the strangers had broken in and then said, and then it just cut to them holding them up on stage, and they had to like answer questions and talk to people while their hands are like sweaty. So
oh god. All right. The
no,
trick
but it's
is
gonna
you
be
just look
fun.
into the lights. You just look into the lights and then you're kind of blinded. And then it's like you're looking at the audience, but you can't really fully take it in because you're like a little bit disoriented. So just do
Yeah.
that.
Okay. All
Okay. Let
right.
me know how that goes.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's not how I'm gonna handle it, but
It's
no, but
gonna
it's
be
going to be really exciting, and like,
yes.
I think there's some really good films that they're showing, and some great movies. So I'm honored that Strangers would be included in it.
Hell yeah. Do you have a choreographed dance routine as well? Or is that a surprise? Am I not supposed to say that?
I mean, now you've said something,
I'm
so
sorry.
it's out. I had
Okay.
been doing a lot of tap work during, throughout the pandemic. It was just I focused on my dance, so I feel like it's going to be pretty exciting.
I think that's great. And then you start out with like the sack head and do you tap dance, take off the sack. You have one of the girls' plastic masks on. Then you take that off, another plastic. It's just like a Russian doll of like strangers'
It's like
masks.
you've seen it. It's like it's pretty eerie. how connected you are.
Listen, I'm sorry I've been watching from the swing across that window there, watching these dance routines. No, but this is going to be amazing. You're going to do great. October 22nd at the Paramount in Austin, Texas. Also rumored to be haunted, so that's fun. That's an extra
Yeah.
bonus. Yeah, all right. All right, Bryan, thank you so much. This has been a blast.
All right. Thank you. I
And I'm
really
so glad I
appreciate it.
got to tell you, like after all these years, like this movie really fucked me up. And I've like, it's one of the few that I like can't really rewatch. So I'm glad I got to let you know
Well,
that.
I'm glad that I fucked you up as a kid and that it's carried on all these years.
Going strong. I'm gonna have trouble sleeping tonight. So thank you.